history of the aviation world is full of strange and astonishing events, but this one is really different. Imagine yourself on a routine flight, looking forward to a vacation or just wanting to relax. Then suddenly, without any warning, the plane begins to go up, and it does not stop. It continues to rise higher and higher so that you realize that you are no longer just flying, you are going into outer space. How could this be? Today we are discussing one of the weirdest events in airplane history. This is the story of Atlantic Airways Flight 728, a flight that flew much further than it should have. It's a tale of confusion, surprise, excitement, and fear. We'll examine how the pilot responded to what was wrong with the plane. So stay with us because this is a journey that will surprise you. But at this point, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Atlantic Airways Flight 728 was meant to be a normal flight, but what unfolded during the adventure will astonish everyone. Passengers, crew members, and even people on the ground got themselves into an impossible situation. This is not a strange flight story, it is about bravery, rapid thinking, and coexistence in responding to an unexpected incident. Atlantic Airways Flight 728 was supposed to be a routine flight from New York City to London. The crew was very experienced. Captain Robert Hansen had flown for more than 20 years, and First Officer Linda Vasquez had hundreds of flying hours in her logbook. Everything seemed well, until it wasn't. The first sign of trouble happened about 2 hours into the flight. The plane would shake sometimes. That was nothing out of the ordinary, but Captain Hansen saw something unusual with the altitude numbers. The altimeter showed that the plane was rising, but they hadn't ordered it to do so. Linda inspected their systems a second time, thinking maybe it was just a sensor malfunction. But very soon they realized that the airplane wasn't going up, it was going up fast. All these automatic systems designed to maintain the correct height of the plane had malfunctioned. Instead of leveling out, the plane continued to climb. The autopilot wasn't working, and part of their backup systems hadn't been functioning either. Captain Hansen knew that the height changes were dangerous and called for swift correction. He therefore acted swiftly. He took over the control of the plane, tried to stabilize it back to level flight, but nothing seemed to do the trick. The situation was becoming increasingly stressful in the cockpit. They had to know what was happening quickly. Captain Hansen tried to steady the plane. He called air traffic control, but they also couldn't believe what was going on. The plane was now flying higher than passenger jets usually go. It was passing through the tropopause, the part of the atmosphere where the air becomes thinner and colder, and moving into the stratosphere. This can't be happening, Linda said as she looked out of the cockpit window. The sky was turning a dark blue, and they realized they were heading towards space. Panic started to set in, but Captain Hansen stayed focused. The crew did their best to keep the passengers calm, but they were understandably terrified. Imagine being on that flight, watching the Earth get farther away, not knowing if you'd make it back. The view from the cockpit was beautiful and scary. The deep blue sky was unlike anything they had ever seen before. Captain Hansen and Linda realized they were in unknown territory. There was no process for this, no instruction for what to do when your commercial jet is going into space. Their training had prepared them for many situations, but not for this one. They needed to stay calm and do anything they could to get control back. Below, on the ground, air traffic controllers were very worried. No one expected something like this to happen. They tried to reach out and understand what was happening, but the radar showed something shocking: a passenger plane going much higher than it should. Confusion filled the control room as they worked on a plan. How could they help a plane that was going out of the atmosphere? Inside the plane, everything was a mess. Captain Hansen was trying to regain control again, but even after he killed the autopilot, the plane continued rising. Linda was hastily scanning for emergency procedures, but there was no list for accidentally flying into space. The cabin was awful too. Passengers were shocked, some were screaming, others were praying, and a few were just gazing out of the windows at this blackening sky. Mark Thompson, a science teacher who happened to be on board, later described it as surreal, like watching the Earth drift away, knowing you shouldn't be seeing it from that perspective. The flight attendants did their best to keep people calm, but they were scared too. They had trained for emergencies, but nothing like this. Some passengers held on to each other, crying, while others were very quiet, with uncertainty, each second feeling like an hour. The crew handed out oxygen masks, although the plane was still just barely pressurized. Coldness in the cabin was felt, and anxiety was palpable. Passengers looked at one another with fear and disbelief etched on their faces. Captain Hansen knew they had to bring the plane back up to a safe altitude. Fast, the air was getting too thin, and the engines were sputtering. Taking a deep breath, steadying his hands, he made a decision that was next to pure lunacy. He sacrificed his main flight control system in hopes of taking back control through purely manual means. For a moment, everything was ambiguous. The plane stopped moving upward and entered a strange silence as all waited. Slowly, the aircraft began to fall. The descent was bumping rough, so that the bumps shook the aircraft, but it was working. Captain Hansen and Linda worked together, making careful adjustments to bring the aircraft low enough so that finally they could relax. The descent was nerve-wracking. Every time they went down a little was a small victory, but they knew they were not out of the woods yet. The engines complained loud, and they had to be slow on anything that could catch them moving when they weren't supposed to. Linda monitored the instruments while Captain Hansen worked on controlling the descent. They talked incessantly, and every word counted in this deadly situation. It was a team effort, and they knew that totally one had to trust the other. At last, the plane leveled off and flew at what was now a safe cruising altitude. Finally, after what seemed like forever, they started their descent into London. When the wheels finally touched down, the cabin erupted into cheers and applause. People were crying, hugging each other, just glad to be alive. Captain Hansen and Linda were exhausted but relieved clearly. By the time they hit the ground, all the emergency workers, reporters, and flight experts were surrounding the crash site to find out what actually had happened there. The news spread fast, news channels talked about it, social media exploded, and conspiracy theories started appearing. Some people believed it was a failed government experiment, others claimed it showed proof of UFOs or hidden technology. But it was more complicated than that. Passengers were let off the plane, and many looked surprised. The young mother who had been soothing her child was now with emergency workers, looking tired and relieved. Mark Thompson, the science teacher, spoke to a news team, talking about the strange feeling of seeing the Earth from a view he never expected. People all over the world wanted to know how a regular plane got close to space. So what really happened? It turned out that a failure with the plane's altitude sensors led to many errors in the flight control system. The autopilot trying to solve the problem received wrong information and attempted to climb higher, and the attempts of the crew to stop it made the situation even worse by activating the backup systems. It was a weird combination of technical problems nobody could have foreseen. Aviation specialists stated that despite the fact that these systems were meant to be fail-safe, there was something seriously wrong in this case. The air company was criticized severely. Changes were made to prevent a repeat of that kind of situation. The aviation industry was educated both on being able to have backup systems and on how strong people can be in hard times. The research also made changes to pilot and crew training. They were now instructed on how to deal with near impossible, very high altitude situations. Captain Hansen and Linda became champions of better training and stricter system checks. After all, they both knew firsthand how quickly things could go wrong and the importance of being prepared for any possible scenario. This is not only the story of a plane that flew too high, but also a story of human beings aboard, and the fear that struck their souls and the boldness it took to return. Captain Hansen and First Officer Vasquez were heroes, not because they were perfect, but because they maintained clarity of thought when everything about the situation seemed to have gone wrong. The same strength came about in the passengers, ordinary people with an extraordinary life-hanging situation. Such events remind us how quickly things can change and how thin the line between normal and chaos is. And however, they remind us of our strength and how we never give up moving forward when things seem impossible. The story of Flight 728 proves human determination, quick thinking, and the support we find in each other during tough times. The result was safe, thanks to crew courage, teamwork on the part of the passengers, and help from everyone on the ground. The aviation industry also remembered this event as a time to improve. Good technology is great, but it's not perfect. Human skill and bravery often determine disaster or survival. As passengers, we often forget how complicated flying is, but stories like this remind us of the amazing work that keeps us safe. If you think it's as amazing as we do, tell us what you think in the comments below. What would you do in a situation like this? Remember to like and subscribe and join us for more explorations of stories that truly test the limits of human experience. Thanks for watching.